This FedGov Today program is sponsored by NDIA, the National Defense Industrial Association. On this edition of FedGov Today with Francis Rose, some self-service technology trouble at the IRS.
You would think it was a touch screen. It wasn't a touch screen. It was a trackball. It was very difficult to click. And so it was very outdated.
TIGTA's Elena Monroe on FedGov Today in just a moment. You can join Defense Innovators August 27th through 29th in Washington, D.C. for the NDIA Emerging Technologies for Defense Conference. It features a great lineup of top government leaders, classified briefings, and a new global defense hackathon. You can see the current lineup and register at ndiatechexpo.org. That's ndiatechexpo.org. The Internal Revenue Service is killing a program that offers kiosks to taxpayers at 37 field offices around the country. The Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration finds more than half of the 100 kiosks the IRS hosts don't work. Elena Monroe is Chief of Staff for Inspections and Evaluations at TIGTA. Elena, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. What's the genesis, the history behind the kiosk program and what you've looked at it for the IRS? Welcome.
Thank you, Francis. So we found out about the kiosk program. We started looking into it after we did some on-site Taxpayer Assistance Center reviews. We were on-site looking at various different taxpayer services. That's one of the things we do as part of our oversight, is to actually go in and see what taxpayers are being offered and whether or not they line up with what IRS is supposed to be providing for services. And while we were there, during our interviews with managers, we started to identify some of the issues with the kiosks. And so that's what really launched us to do a separate review specifically on the kiosks themselves.
What did the managers and the people on site tell you about the kiosks versus what you were able to learn from headquarters about what their view was of what was happening at these taxpayer assistance centers?
When we were on site, we noticed, we had different sites that we looked at. And so initially we noticed that some of them were out of service and some of them just didn't work as well. I was one of the people who were on site. And so I can say personally, trying to navigate on the kiosk, it was very cumbersome. It was hard you would think it was a touch screen. It wasn't a touch screen. It was a trackball. It was very difficult to click. And so it was very outdated. When we interviewed the managers, we determined that they were having some issues with service tickets. And so we started to look further into that and really determine where the issue was. Was it on the IRS's side? Was it a contract issue? And that's kind of where we got with this review.
What did you find when you looked at where the issues were coming from?
And so when we looked at the contract, we realized that there were some things that were lacking from the specifics of the contract. For example, while they had a commitment to customer service, they did not identify or articulate what would be, a reasonable service response time. Also, there were no concessions, meaning that if there were any delays in repairs or anything like that, there were no consequences for that written within the contract.
So the kind of the change in plan here, I think, is also interesting, Elena. You write in your most recent work on this, after we informed IRS management about our concerns, they indicated the plan was to work with the existing contractor to make the kiosks operational by December 31st, 2024. And then your team writes, in January 25, we visited 8 taxpayer assistance centers with inoperable kiosks and found the machines were still not working. What did you learn at that point about, you'd already told them these don't work, they said we're going to fix them, you found that at least a subset of them were not. What was the work that you and your team did at that point to try to ascertain what was going on?
So we asked additional questions and determined that some of the reasons why some of these kiosks were still inoperable were because the pieces to repair the machines, they were no longer being manufactured. So it wasn't a fixable issue in some instances. For example, like the screens, they weren't being manufactured anymore, so they weren't able to repair them.
Is this a matter of outdated technology or the acquisition process by which these kiosks were procured being challenging? some combination of those, some other factors? Or is this a case where maybe the situation with the kiosks as they stand doesn't matter so much as what the agency does moving forward to try to provide some kind of self-service option for taxpayers who come into the tax?
One of the things that we noticed was that this is something that has been in place since 2011. As an oversight agency, we don't really comment as to like what would be the most effective approach, but we do test what the agency has to determine whether it's operating. In this instance, we identified that it was really a lack of contract oversight that led to some of these issues that we're seeing in this particular matter.
Is it your sense that that was a challenge with the original procurement of the kiosks back in the probably 2009, 2010 time period? Was it an issue with, because I read it, you write, the IRS awarded a firm fixed price contract in June 2021 for the monitoring and maintenance of the kiosks. Was it an acquisition issue there or some other place on the timeline? What's your read on where that part of it became an issue?
We were only able to review within our scope from 2021 to currently. And so with that, we saw that they had issued a firm fixed price contract, which we estimated to be about $500,000 per year. And so when we were looking at that, we were determining, okay, with the money that's been awarded, what services have been rendered and have they been in alignment with the contract that we were able to see? And with that, we were able to provide the response here that really they weren't operating within what we would consider to be reasonable response times. And we articulate that in the report where we show that some of these kiosks were not operational for over a year.
I read that you recommend the IRS perform a study to determine whether a new kiosk program that uses updated technology or deploys laptops would provide effective and efficient self-service options to taxpayers. What I read between the lines, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that it seems there's a demand either from the managers in the local centers or from the taxpayers themselves or somewhere on the spectrum, there's a demand for a self-service option at these centers. Is that a fair read on my part?
Well, they did have taxpayer sessions, and we were able to identify that in our review as well. There were about roughly 7,500 taxpayer sessions in fiscal year 2024. So there is a demand. In terms of what that might look like, we can't say specifically what the IRS should do, but as the IRS is going into workforce changes, restructuring, we can determine that taxpayers do need services, and this would provide them with some type of service that they can use as a self-service option that could be beneficial, especially for people who may not have access to the internet or other abilities within their own local community.
Elena, is this the type of issue that you will follow up on, or is this closed until some future point where it's either raised again by work that you're doing in another area, visiting the tax, or somebody raises it through awareness or something like that?
Well, we're constantly looking for services that are being provided to taxpayers to help improve tax administration. And so that's something that we're always looking at. With this, the IRS responded that they would be assessing the potential benefits of and challenges for this program by early next year, January of 2026. So at this point, we're going to wait to see what the IRS does. And then from there, we'll determine based on what's going on at that time to see if it's something that we may look into.
Elena, thank you very much for taking time to talk to me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
You can find a link to the TIG to Work Elena discussed on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. The Naval Research Laboratory is prototyping a hydrogen small unit power system in collaboration with the Marine Corps' Expeditionary Energy Office and industry partners. Captain Randy Cruz, U.S. Navy, the commander of the Naval Research Laboratory, is one of my guests on FedGov Today TV this week. You can watch the debut on ABC7 in Washington and on the FedGov Today YouTube channel at 10:30 Sunday morning. If you missed the debut, you can watch anytime at fedgovtoday.com and on YouTube. To make sure you don't miss the next FedGov Today podcast, follow the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your shows. And you can listen on demand for the next FedGov Today podcast, fedgovtoday.com. I'm Francis Rose. Thanks for listening.